Welcome, everyone, to the Flower Files podcast sponsored by Wildly Native Flower Farm. Here, everyone is welcome to talk with fellow flower lovers, including real perspectives from the farm, the flowers, and me, the florist.
From the messy day-to-day operations down to the details and even business perspectives, this podcast has a little bit of everything to keep it real. We know that life can get crazy and we don't always have the time to spend on what we love, so we are here to help you take a little time to indulge in nature. I'm Liza Getz.
I'm Lizzie Frey, and we are the team that makes this podcast. Every once in a while, we have a couple guests, this business thing, and what we are working with is called life.
Join us as we walk you through how to think outside the box, talk from the farmer's perspective, have honest conversations about florals, and how to run, well, life. So listen in.
You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, in the podcast section, and any of your other podcast platforms. You can also find us online at wildlynativeflowerfarm.com, and in an easy way, you can look in the show notes, and all of the information will be right there for easy access for you guys.
Hey there, flower lovers. Welcome back to the Flower Files, a podcast where we dive into the art, the business, and the beauty of flowers. I'm Liza, and today we're talking about something that often plays a supporting role, so think of your best bra, in floral arrangement. But honestly, I think they sometimes deserve a little bit more of a spotlight than we give them. And so today we are going to be exploring greens in floral work, how to use them effectively, what types work best for different designs, why greenery is so much more than just filler. If you've ever struggled with making your bouquets look fuller, more natural, or extra special, this episode is for you. So grab your favorite drink, settle in, and let's talk all things that are green. All right, so let's start with a big question. Why do greens matter in floral design? I think there's a lot of misconception that folks feel that greens are an extra or they are just kind of there. I don't think they appreciate all of the different components that they add to a floral design. They add, for instance, depth and texture, different leaf shapes, different colors, different textures, which then create movement and contrast within the arrangement. When you first set up whatever you're arranging, they also create that basic structure. If you're going to have something asymmetrical or symmetrical, your greens really lay that foundation and they really get it set for the flowers to tuck in. Depending on the hue of the green, it really also creates the color and the balance. So if you're looking for something to be softer, you wouldn't use a green that is very, very sharp in contrast. You would have a different style of green. Um, it it also helps, honestly, bring that bold arrangement into balance, so it's not screaming in your face. It gives you a little bit of organization, basically. So you have all of these different components and all of these different textures. Think of something that's silvery and feathery as opposed to deep glossy green. So when you're looking at greens, you can have soft, feathery fronds. You can have something with a lot more structure and is much more rigid. And that's really going to lay that foundation for what you're building next. They also tend to be a little bit budget friendly. I'm not going to use the C word and say cheaper because they're not always cheaper. Sometimes there's specialty greens that you use, and those can cost just as much, if not more, than some of your other blooms and fillers. So while they help round out an arrangement, they are an important component when it comes to figuring out the cost and the bottom dollar. They create some lush feel. I feel like that word is something that's used so much in the floral industry. For an elevated design, we're going to make it lush. Okay, I like ice cream, so I'm going to add more toppings to it, and that's going to make it lush. Delicious, delicious, delicious. um, so basically, think of the greens as that foundation of your floral work because they really provide balance, support, and that organic feel that helps bring things together. Our top types of greens is something that folks often ask us. And I feel like if you're a traditional brick and mortar florist building and you're just working with wholesale greens that you can source, I would think the top greens for those folks are going to be eucalyptus, ruscus, a variety of ferns and maybe some other leaves and textures. Salal, also known as lemon leaf. I feel like those are kind of the top ones. But for us as a flower farm, we see things a little differently. We look through that lens of greens very, very, very differently. So there's lots of different types of greens. You can get them from your own garden, which is clearly what we do. Some of my favorite greens to use, I love using herbs in arrangements. Now, let me clarify. When I'm talking about an arrangement, I'm talking about something that's going to have a water source and isn't going to be asked to hold up to the rigors of something like a bouquet. A bouquet work has to have a much sturdier green that's going to do well outside of water for extended periods of time. And herbs don't always fit that bill. They tend to wilt a little quicker than some of your other standard greens. So when I'm talking about herbs and some of those greens and I say arranging, I mean actually in a vase. So, herbs, some of my favorites are rosemary, sage, lots of different kinds of mints. We use lemon balm, lavender, just having that little extra pop of something that smells really delicious just gives you that extra waft of ooh as you walk past. I would also think that as you're sourcing greens, there's lots of different kinds of greens that are naturally already in your area if you're sourcing naturally in your garden. So, cress is one. That's another one that we like to use. Different types of thyme and oregano, back to the herbs, I know, but they all lend different feels. They have different structures, and some of them cascade, and some of them are upright. Some of them will actually root right in the vase as well. That's definitely something that we've seen with mint. There's a wide variety of shrubs that we will also use as greens, and it depends on what the use is for. Forsythia is a fantastic green that we use year round, actually. Another green that we lend really heavily, not lend, another green that we depend really heavily on in the fall is nine bark or physiotega. That green, I'm sorry, physiocarpus. Physiocarpus is another green that is technically, it's not green, it's deep maroon, but we use that in the fall and that lends that deep, rich fall feel. So we'll use those greens. I absolutely love using camellia. That is a fantastic green to use that lasts out of water. Then, when it comes to other types of work, it's going to depend on what we have available, what's going to do well. Viburnum, for example, is a green that we use often. It does really well in the fall, and you can catch it as it's starting to turn and have different hues. And there's a lot of different leaf shapes, leaf sizes, and leaf colors that all make sense to use with those arrangements in the fall. They are just absolutely amazing. Another type of green that we've used often and kind of tucked in once in a while when we're headed towards fall, a lot of those greens that we use are some holly. We will tuck that in once in a while because it's just a slightly different texture and it doesn't always scream Christmas. It's something you can kind of tuck in later in the fall. And there's lots of grasses and other textures that we will use that sometimes lend the feel of a green that's not necessarily a green. I think when you first get started being a flower farmer, you tend to underestimate how many of different types of greens and textures you will need in order to get that design to come together. I also encourage you to take a walk. Take a walk in nature and pull different types of greens. We will often hop on the gator and go and cut different things like that looks pretty and this is neat and we're going to try this and see how well does it last? What is its phase life like? What does it do when it's out of water? How does it interact with the other things in the arrangement? Now, I'm not saying that we're not above from once in a while ordering from a wholesaler for something specific. We have to be careful if we're doing an overhead installation, for example, that could be near food or if there's anything that could possibly drop on someone. I'm thinking the Springerei ferns, and there's definitely different types of greens that may shed a little bit. And I wouldn't want that near food if somebody's going to use a garland down the center of a table. Similar to baby's breath, where baby's breath sheds, some of your greens will also shed. So I always am super careful about where things are going to be positioned. A huge green that is used in the floral world is smilax. It's difficult to always know that it's available. It has a very specific season, but that tends to be the green that a lot of people see in their Pinterest photos with lots of things cascading in tents. In the show notes, we'll tuck a couple pictures in of smilax installed in tents. And there's some other types of greens that we've experimented with, but this is one of those places where, as a flower farmer florist, there's times where we have to make decisions about does it make sense for us to order something? Does it make sense for us to forage something? Does it make sense for us to grow something specifically? Clematis vine is a beautiful vine that has a similar texture to smilax, but it doesn't always last as long in super high heat. So you have to know your venue, you have to know the application, you have to know how it's going to be installed, what the bride wants. So there's so many layers to trying to pick the different types of greens. That's really, really important. Layering when it comes to setting up your greens too is also really important. You're going to want to have a different feel so it's not the same green used throughout, unless you're looking for that very, very specifically repetitive style. You can use greens as a focal point. Green dianthus is absolutely amazing. Um, and there is greenery based arrangements with minimal blooms that we've seen. Moss is another green that we've used to kind of maybe cover some mechanics. And folks don't always think of moss as a green that would be used in greening something up. But if you're working with a compote, if you're working with chicken wire and other types of mechanics, for example, those pieces are going to lend structure and help hide mechanics that you may not always want to see. Then there's seasonality, which we did talk about, and conditioning your greens. As always, you want to trim at the correct angles. You want to hydrate them in water before designing. Eucalyptus, fantastic green, so many different styles and colors and textures and shapes and smells. We grow about 400 feet of eucalyptus here, and there's 4 or 5 different kinds that we have. Some last out of water, some last not out of water. Some of them are really persnickety. Some you have to cut the tips out, and the rest of it does well. There's so many different kinds of eucalyptus. I think that's probably I will say that that is my favorite green to use. I love the versatility of eucalyptus. And then when it comes to seasonality and deep fall and you're heading towards winter, those greens are a whole different conversation. Those are your pines and your needles and your hollies and your mistletoes and your magnolias. So, the greens that we're focusing on with this conversation today is really looking at arranging greens. Trends for greens have shifted over time. So, before we wrap up today, I wanted to talk about some of those trending shifts that we see. We see a lot of hanging greenery installations, which I already touched on a little bit, but lots of things suspended, things over a reception table, things to soften the poles inside of a tent. It lends that dreamy, romantic look. I feel like we definitely have seen an increase in folks looking at the entire space and wanting to soften lighting fixtures, for example. And just a tiny little touch of green to a lighting fixture can really change the whole feel of the space. We actually have done weddings where some brides have requested everything just be greens. So that was a really neat challenge. Just greens, no flowers, lots of texture. So that is a totally different perspective. Wreaths, garlands, all of that kind of stuff. And folks will use wreaths throughout the year on doors as a welcoming piece or something along those lines, and tucking florals in with those. So clearly, you're going to build a floral wreath differently than you would a Christmas wreath. So we do still see wreaths used for that. And quite honestly, sometimes we see wreaths used for funeral work as well. And then garlands. There's different types of garlands. There's different thicknesses, there's different uses. So I feel like when somebody says wreaths and garlands, people immediately picture Christmas. But if you're setting a rectangle table and you're going to do greenery down the center, technically that's a garland. We see folks using ferns and lots of eucalyptus and lots of texture. And you can make them thick, you can make them thin, you can make them sparse, you can make them so many different ways. And there's so many inspirations for that. So I feel like on a rectangle table, it's either a garland with some greens or it tends to be scattered vases. And that seems to be what we're seeing this year at least. And then dried greens are a whole other way that you can use greens. So, say you have a huge harvest come in out of the field, eucalyptus, for example. We've done that many times where we just have bundles of dried eucalyptus because we've cut it and say there's a heavy frost coming, or we needed to harvest heavy because of wind or weather or something that we know that's going to impact that quality. If we don't cut everything that we can, we then will go ahead and dry and preserve. And there's many greens that you can do that with, but there's also many greens that you can't do that with because it just gets to be messy afterwards. So I hope that clarifies some of your questions on greens. I hope you have a different perspective on Kermit the Frog and being green. So that's a wrap on today's episode. I hope this quick dive into the beauty of greens and how they could possibly inspire you to experiment with different textures and shapes in your floral design. And I hope you loved this episode. And if you did, please do me a favor, subscribe, leave a review, share it with your fellow flower lovers, fellow flower friends. And if you want free resources to help you work on building your floral work, make sure you grab our ultimate guide to level up your garden growing cut flowers by season. I'll drop the link here in the show notes. I have to say, it's a beauty of a product. And I know everybody says, oh, my stuff's great. I I really mean we have put heart and soul and so many hours into pictures and putting everything together and getting this ready for you. So take a peek, share it with friends. Thank you so much. And until next time, happy designing. And don't forget, sometimes greens make the bouquet.
Hey guys, just dropping a line to tell you about Patreon.
So I asked them, meaning Mom and Amber, what is Patreon anyway? Because I honestly had no idea. So we're going to explain it to you from our perspective so that you understand and so that I understand.
Because the first time I saw it, I was like, Patron? We're drinking tequila? Great. So Patreon is for less than a cup of coffee, those fancy coffees that y'all like, a day, you can sign up to become one of our members.
A little family.
Exactly. And what does that get us?
It gets us some freebies, some special episodes that other people do not get access to. You can interact with us on a special platform where we can ask you questions and interact with you. It's tons of fun.
Mm-hmm. And even on those special episodes, we might be less censored than we are already. And we're going to have a couple fun ones that we can just kind of throw in there and talk about and laugh and go on tangents and have fun. So I hope that you all enjoy it because we're going to have fun along the way. We're crazy, crazy, crazy excited.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Back to the episode now.
Yeah.
Bye.
Gracias!